Hello, everyone, and welcome to this virtual event for Women of Steel, sponsored by the USW National Women's Committee. My name is Adrienne Pavo, and I'm head of our union's National Education and Equality Department. I hope that you and your loved ones are staying healthy and well in these challenging times. Because we're meeting online, I want to acknowledge that North America is the traditional territory of many, many Indigenous nations who continue to live on and care for this land today. Those of us who came later, by choice or by force, have a duty to learn to live respectfully and in a healthy way together. So we've got more than 50 Women of Steel together on the line right now from all across North America. I wish we could see you all, but I'm grateful that we have a collage of some of your beautiful faces. This event will last an hour. Before we review the agenda, here are some key details about how you can be heard during this gathering. You can send in questions and comments by clicking on the question bar on the right-hand side of your screen. Type your question in the box that opens up, then click send. We'll be checking the question box and answering as many as we can. We'll also put poll questions up on screen to learn more about who you are and how you're doing during the COVID-19 pandemic. During the next hour, we'll have a short presentation about the impact of the pandemic on women in Canada. We'll hear from National Women's Committee reps from Districts 3 and 6. We'll identify the new programs and laws women will need after the pandemic, so we don't just return to the way things were, but create a new and better normal. Throughout, we'll take time to hear from you. And finally, we'll find out who our contest winner is. First, let's learn more about who's attending this event. We're going to put a series of poll questions up on screen for you to answer. And I'll let you know now, there's a quirk in the design of this video meeting platform. Some of you may find that you click on an answer, but nothing changes on your screen. If that happens to you, don't worry. There's nothing any of us can do to fix the problem until the web designers figure it out. So let's start with the first poll questions to learn more about who's at this gathering. So question 1, which district are you in? Please choose one of the answers: District 3, District 5, District 6, or a district in the United States. So we'll take a moment to let you click on the correct answer. And this is a good chance to practice using this poll function because we'll be doing a few more of these. I think everybody has probably had a chance to answer the poll question. So let's close the poll results, or let's close the poll, and we can see that we've got lots of attendees from District 6. We have a good number from District 3, and I'm really happy we also have folks attending from District 5 and from districts in the US. So welcome, everyone. So let's go to our second poll question. So the second question is, oh, we're waiting for that to come up. There you go. Which of these roles do you play in our union? You can select all that apply. So maybe you sit on a women's or other committee. Maybe you're a steward, a local union officer, a member, or you may play other kinds of roles. So click as many as apply to you. We'll give a few more seconds for you to answer the questions. I can see the responses coming in. And let's close the question now and display the results. And so we've got a lot of committee representatives, women's or other committees on the line. We've got a lot of stewards, an impressive number of local union officers. Of course, we've got people who are members, and we've got people who fill other roles as well. So let's do one more poll question. And our third question is, because of the pandemic, are you laid off, still at work, but working unreduced hours, still at work, but with reduced hours, working from home, or none of the above? So please select the answer that best describes you. I can see the answers are coming in. So we'll give a few more seconds for you to respond. I think it's safe for us to close that question now and show the results. And so interesting to see that at least half of us are working from home. We've got another quarter of us who are still at work, same number of hours. And we also have folks who are working reduced hours, some who have been laid off, and then a smaller group for whom there's another category. Unfortunately, we can only offer 5 choices. So thank you for sharing in those poll questions. Now let's look at the big picture. How are women in Canada doing during the pandemic? To help us, we have Meg Gingrich from the Canadian National Office's Research Department. During Meg's presentation, please ask any questions you might have by clicking on the question bar on the right-hand side of your screen, typing your question in the box that opens up, then clicking send. Over to you, Meg.
All right, thanks, Adrienne. So can we bring up the first slide, please? So the COVID pandemic's impacts have not been gender neutral. They also affect people differently based on other factors such as class and race. And as you can see, one of the most immediate effects of this crisis is that we've seen a huge spike in domestic violence, which mostly affects women. Reports of intimate partner violence have risen an estimated 20 to 30% in Canada. Since the pandemic has started, at least 9 women and girls have been killed in domestic incidents. The stay-at-home orders, while extremely important in protecting public health, often mean that women in abusive situations are left without any support networks, and it is simply much harder to be away from an abuser. Women's shelters often don't have the infrastructure or financial capacity to meet some of the stricter public health regulations, making the situation even more difficult. Next slide, please. So in terms of the labor market, even before the pandemic, women earned on average 32% less than men, with significantly higher gaps for racialized women, Indigenous women, immigrant women, and women living with disabilities. We also know that LGBTQ women face wage gaps and other significant labor market discrimination. These inequalities impact who is most affected during the pandemic. Next slide. So one of the contributing factors to the wage gap is that our labor market is highly gendered, with so-called women's work typically undervalued. Women, especially women of color, take on the vast majority of the so-called 5 C's, that's care work, cleaning, clerical, cashiering, catering. And these are often low-paid, precarious jobs. They're also the most essential. Right now, 2/3 of all essential workers are women. As you can see, PSWs, grocery store workers, social service workers, childcare workers, the vast majority of them are women. Next slide, please. So on the other side of the coin, women were also most likely to be hit with immediate job losses. Accommodation and retail, 2 low-paid, female-dominated sectors, were hit especially hard very early on. In March, 2/3 of all job losses were among women, despite women making up 47% of all workers. While men have in a sense caught up in April, the underlying precariousness of these jobs, with a lack of unionization and a real lack of clarity when things will open up again, mean that many of these job losses will not return. Next slide, please. So this really sums it up. Of course, existing inequalities interact with this pandemic, meaning that racialized workers, low-wage workers, casual workers, immigrant workers, and those without unionized jobs are most affected. They are either more likely to be in essential jobs, often without adequate pay or protective equipment, or in jobs with significant layoffs. Next slide, please. So on top of the labor market impacts, the health impacts of this crisis did not hit everyone in the same way. In particular, women in Indigenous communities are at much higher risk. Historic and current day colonialism mean that in Indigenous communities, there is more likely to be a lack of clean water, there's often fewer health resources, and housing can be inadequate. Next slide. This also hits us at home. While it is somewhat of a privilege to be able to work from home during all of this, the downsides are not hitting men and women in the same way. Typically, women take on significantly more of the domestic labor than men. This is most pronounced in male-female two-parent homes, which is, of course, not the family structure that all of us have. But the expectations about what women are naturally good at and what is and isn't considered real or important work affect the pay and conditions of women working in female-dominated sectors like long-term care and childcare. It can also mean that overall, women do a lot more domestic labor than men. This can influence women's ability to take on full-time paid work. During the pandemic, women are reporting higher levels of burnout than men. They're saying they aren't able to be as productive in their paid jobs as men, and they're taking on the lion's share of homeschooling. Next slide, please. So there's nothing natural or inevitable about the way things were arranged before this or in how the pandemic is affecting people differently. There's a lot we can do, and one of the most immediate needs essential to an equitable recovery is access to affordable, quality childcare with living wages for workers. It will affect who works and who can't after the pandemic. And with that, I throw it back over to Adrienne.
Thank you very much, Meg. So we have time to hear any questions that you might have about the presentation that Meg has just given. So if you have a question, please type it into the question box that appears when you click on the question bar. And I'm not seeing any questions, so maybe it's a shy or a tired group tonight. That's okay. We'll have time to return to some questions later on, so don't be afraid to think of them as they come up. I'm seeing something appear, a comment, and it's from Jody. Thank you for presenting. So thanks very much, Jody, for that kind comment. So don't be shy to think of questions as you go along, type them into the box at any time, and we'll draw on them as we have time. So thanks again, Meg, very much. So we do still want to hear from everybody at home, and so we're going to go to a second set of poll questions for you to answer. And these questions have to do with the impact of the pandemic. So let's go to our next poll question, please. So in your home, are you caring for children age 12 and under, children 13 and older, elderly family members, other adult family members, or none of the above? So please take a moment to let us know which one or more of these answers apply to you. I can see that the poll results are coming in, so we'll give you a few more seconds to click on the screens. There could be multiple answers, so it takes a little bit longer to respond. I think it's safe for us to close the question now and show the results. So here we see that we've got pretty even results spread across the board. So we've got the majority of us actually not having additional care responsibilities, but lots of us having responsibility for children and other adult members of our family, whether elderly or not. Let's go to a next poll question, please. If you live with a spouse or partner, how has your workload at home changed during the pandemic? And your options are, I'm doing a lot more, I'm doing some more, no change, I'm doing less, or none of the above. So take some time to click on those answers. Let the responses come in. And I think it's safe for us to close the poll and show the results. And so what's interesting to see is that we've got quite a number of you saying that you're doing a lot more at home, as well as some saying that they're doing a bit more, and fewer people saying that there's been no change or that they're actually doing less. While others are indicating that the answers didn't really describe their situation. And let's go to our next poll question, and that is, if you're laid off or working from home, which of the following is true for you? Childcare will be available when I return to work. Childcare will not be available when I return to work. I'm not sure yet, or I do not use childcare services. So take a moment to let us know what's the best description for your situation. We're going to give a little bit more time for people to fill out those results. Okay, I think we can close the question now and display the results. And so the majority of us don't use childcare services. Some of us are saying that it's uncertain, and others are saying that their childcare will be available to them when they return to work. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and experiences. Now we'd like to hear from two members of the USW National Women's Committee. Veronica Tanner is chair of the committee and a member of Local 1-405 from Cranbrook, British Columbia. She's going to share news from District 3. Veronica?
Thanks, Adrienne. Good evening, sisters, and greetings from rural British Columbia. I need to start with thanking all the women who are working to provide us with the services we need, especially those who are on the front lines. This is a challenging time, and in addition to the paid work we are doing, there are many more challenges we need to work through. Women in our district have been impacted in a number of ways. Our members in healthcare, who are already dealing with challenging conditions even before this pandemic, are continuing to step up for our communities. I know I've been afraid. So try to imagine what fear they carry is unimaginable. Again, I thank you. Our school district members are also working through how this pandemic is affecting their lives in all of our provinces and the lives of our children if we do not get this right. And to our screeners who fought and won their fight to be provided with the proper equipment to do their job safely. In my own local, we have seen major impacts, including layoffs at Trickle Creek Lodge, where our annual district summer school is held. Forest industry has seen complete shutdowns, with approximately 500 to 560 members laid off. Those parents eager to return to work now have the additional stress of childcare availability for their shift work schedules. Our sisters in the credit unions have faced major challenges as well. I know for myself, this pandemic has brought on a whole new meaning of multitasking. I've always felt that we as women are natural multitaskers and we're pretty damn good at it. But honestly, for me, I have been overwhelmed. Some days I'm not sure if I'm coming or going. Some days I don't even know what day it is. And other days I've actually sat down and just cried. I've always teased I do my best work under pressure, but this pandemic has turned all of our lives upside down, creating a pressure cooker never before seen. My hat goes off to those parents that have taken on homeschooling. My children are grown and gone, but dealing with my 4-year-old grandson on a daily basis has been a handful in itself. Educational is all hell, but challenging. We've all seen the ads telling us we are in this together, and that we are. I want to share an explanation someone shared with me and it helped. We are not in the same boat. We are in the same storm, all in different boats. What the dynamics are in my boat: financial strain due to my husband's layoff, taking on the responsibility of my grandson on a daily basis, still working my full-time job, strange hours just to accommodate him, the fear of layoff myself. And in the middle of all this, we had a death in the family. Unable to come together and share our grief has been another level of being isolated. Someone else's boat looks different. They could be working from home, homeschooling, laid off, unable to provide meals for their families. And for some workplaces, we are still fighting for protective personal equipment. For some sisters facing family violence and/or mental health for themselves and family, it's all been a huge challenge. Yes, we are in this together, but it has been very different for each one of us. The pressure now, more than ever, on our union officers and stewards to make sure employees are protected and safe while at work will also help the non-unionized employees in their workplaces. As our provinces begin to slowly open up, we will all have much to consider. Take your time, do what you feel is right for you, your family, and your communities. There's great content here tonight, and I encourage each of you to take something away to consider. Act upon it if you are able, but please do not put added pressure on yourselves these uncertain times. On an end note, a reminder to those sisters in District 3, we do have an event scheduled next Wednesday, May 20th, for Women of Steel Strategies. If anything rings true, it is now. United we stand, divided we fall. One thing I know about Women of Steel, we are unstoppable and we will move forward. I sure thank you for a few minutes of your time. Sisters, please stay safe. Adrian?
Thank you very much, Veronica. And just let me say how much I admire your eloquence and your strength. Next, let's hear from Anita Bryant, a staff representative in District 6, and that district's Women of Steel coordinator. Just before I hand things over to her, I want to remind you that you can ask questions of Veronica or Anita or any of us. Click on the question bar on the right-hand side of your screen, type your question in the box that opens up, then click send. We'll have time for questions and comments after Anita's remarks. Anita?
Thank you, Adrian. First of all, I want to thank all of you for finding the time to join this call. We know that everyone is busy during this pandemic and these uncertain times. On Monday, May 11th, the District 6 Women's Committee held a virtual panel to hear what's happening in our district and to look for more ways that we can support our Women of Steel. We know that so many people in Ontario are suffering right now, but we also know that the impact on women is different and in some ways far greater and may be longer lasting. We also know that for racialized, Indigenous, newcomers, and LGBT, and women with disabilities, it becomes even more complicated. Many of the job losses that are occurring are in low-wage sectors, which are dominated by women. Women still carry the bulk of at-home work, which means with the kids off, it's generally women who have to take on additional duties at home, homeschooling, housework, cooking, cleaning. Think of single moms that have lost their only source of income and were in part-time positions. This is the reality of some of the members that I represent in my area. During the best of times, women struggle to find the work-life balance, but during this pandemic, it has become impossible. In District 6, we're hearing stories of women having to send their kids to stay with someone else or herself staying outside of the home because they're worried about infecting their loved ones with COVID. This has to be incredibly difficult decision to make, especially if the kids are infants or toddlers. How do you explain this to them? Additional, women are typically the ones responsible for elder care. This means that in the middle of everything else that's going on, we now have to find time to care for elderly parents who can't leave their homes. But Women of Steel are doing this. Because women make up a high percentage of the jobs in our long-term care homes, their safety is being compromised through the contact within this high-risk environment and the lack of PPE. Some of the stories that we heard was we had a sister who her two sons lost their jobs because their mother worked in a long-term care home. In this same home alone, 70 residents and 20 workers tested positive, with 25 residents passing due to COVID. We heard the devastating story from this home where the members at this home who care for these patients and residents there had to beg the residents that had passed away. These residents are people that they have come to know and love and treat them like family. I can't even imagine how difficult it had to be to deal with those losses in such a short period of time, and then to be responsible to have to beg them because they have passed. The women in this facility are very worried about their mental state. So adequate psychological support is going to be essential for them. We're concerned about the rise also in our district about domestic violence and women unable to flee. In the past 2 months, incidents of women abuse have risen. We need to be mindful that this is statistically, we will have members who are going to be experiencing violence in their home. There's so many issues to be addressed. And we know that as Women of Steel, we're here to stand on the front line and help address those. So thank you so much for taking on this gathering, and it's important to stand together. Thank you, Adrian, back to you.
Thank you very much, Anita. And now we'd like to go to some of the questions that you've been sending in. And I think this first one is one that any one of our speakers so far might be interested in responding to. Let me read it out to you first. So this comes in from Parvinder, who writes, our local is representing more than 7,000 members, some of them working in healthcare facilities and directly affected by COVID-19 situation. How can we assist our members in dealing with this situation? So I'm wondering if I can go to either Anita or Meg. So if either one of you is interested and available to answer this question, why don't you turn your camera on and we'll go with the first one of you that comes up on screen. Anita, do you want to say a few words about the long-term care situation? And then when you finish, let's hear from Meg.
Okay. So the long-term care situations that we're having here in Ontario, I mean, the best thing to do is reach out to your staff rep. What we're finding as staff servicing in this area is the lack of PPE. So through help with our district and with the national office and our health and safety coordinator, we've been able to, unfortunately, us as the union being able to supply the PPE that's been needed in some of our homes. So I would say the most important thing is if you're having issues within your own homes, to make sure you reach out to your staff reps so that they can get that addressed And I'm sure Meg has some more things outside of that that's greater than going to your staff rep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the main thing. First of all, is to reach out to the staff rep, and then there's also, if they have real health and safety concerns, reach out to our health and safety department, on the PPE and the right to refuse unsafe work and so on. I think there's also, to let them know and to work with them to make demands, which we've all been doing in the labor movement, but from the government, to make sure that we actually are getting people adequate personal protective equipment. We need to make sure that we keep fighting for that at a larger level, and make sure that we keep hearing where that's most needed, and involving those members as much as we can, or fighting for them, because they're probably pretty busy and occupied in their essential work. So yeah, I mean, what Anita said, and then also health and safety, making larger demands, working with other unions and labor to make sure that we get people the equipment that they need and so on.
If I could add, I know that the United Steelworkers has been working together with unions across the country through the Canadian Labour Congress on sort of a national campaign to address the crisis in long-term care, and has also been working very closely with the New Democratic Party on this issue. So I think that through various organizations, including our union, there will be opportunities to take part in different kinds of public campaigns to pressure for improvements and changes. So I would just add that on top of what Anita and Meg said. I'm going to go to a couple questions which in a way are kind of related. And so Genevieve writes in, would it be possible to have the content shared after the webinar? And Jody notes that she wonders if women with children are having a hard time finding time to join this meeting, because it comes at almost dinner time for those of you in the Pacific time zone. So what I wanted to say is that both of those are very excellent comments, and we are actually recording this session with the hope that we will, or the intention that we will post it to the USW.ca webpage under COVID-19 resources, so that other sisters will be able to view it, even if they weren't able to join us at this particular time. So please watch for information about how people will be able to join and view this later on. I wanted to go to a question from Amber, and Amber writes, will there be a web training seminar on health and safety for COVID-19 in the workplace? And so I don't know if Anita or if Veronica would like to come on again and answer the question. While you're deciding, what I would say is in the districts, various online sessions like this one, different webinars, have been organized, first of all, for staff to figure out how to work effectively in this strange new environment, but also for other like health and safety committee activists and so on. So I would encourage you to talk to your district education coordinator or your district health and safety coordinator to find out what might be available for you within the area that you're in. And also USW.ca is a very good source of resources for COVID-19, particularly health and safety related information. So thank you for both of those questions. And I think we have time for some more. So I'm just looking at the list that comes in. So we have a question from Susan, and this is one I'm going to encourage Anita to join us to answer. So Susan asks, may I please ask about unions goings on during the pandemic and how these procedures have changed? And so Anita, I think you're very well placed to comment on how we're doing things differently to still meet members' needs during the pandemic.
Yeah, so even though the staff are working from home, I mean, and I have to speak for my district alone, District 6, we are working from home, but we're starting to go back into the offices next week. But since this pandemic started and we've been working from home, nothing's changed as in representing our members. So the only difference is that we're not inside the workplaces and doing social gatherings like that. But we are doing virtual meetings. Things have changed in the sense that there's a lot more emails, a lot more phone calls. And like I said, a lot of our stuff right now is being done virtually. You know, outside of our union functions when it comes to membership meetings and stuff like that, right now that hasn't started back up. You know, there's also ways that we're now looking at whether or not we're going to do some of those. Some of the executive are doing it that way. But, you know, nothing has stopped as in our representation for our membership. I hope I've answered the question.
Thanks very much, Anita. I think that was a good response. I'm going to go next to a question from Alicia. And maybe this is one, Veronica, if you're interested in responding to, or Meg or Anita. The question is, we are having issues at work easing members' fear when other members are being tested for COVID. How do we ease the membership's fears and stop attacks on other members? So this is obviously a challenging situation where members within a unit or within a local are starting to be afraid of one another. And what can we do to try and stop members attacking one another? So I'll just give a moment to see if Veronica or Anita want to find the button for their camera, microphone, and come back on. If not, while we're waiting, I will say that unfortunately, I have heard this raised by others besides just you, Alicia. I think it's a common response when people are afraid that they see fear wherever they turn. And I think the best thing that we can do is through our union to try and put in place really good health and safety protections in the workplace so that people are have a good distance from one another on the work line, in the lunchroom, and on coffee breaks, have proper cleaning facilities and masks and so on. Like that's the best way to reduce the fear and maybe reduce the attacks. Anita, feel free to add your comments too.
Yeah, so you're exactly right, Adrian. That's that's exactly what we're doing. You've answered the question. You know, and we've had it. You know, I've had several occasions where someone has tested positive, and you know, we've been in there with the company saying like, okay, you know, get disinfectant done and stuff like that. Some of our companies have actually shut down right away, immediately. Had somebody come in and clean, and then open back up the next day. You know, we're all in this together. It's making sure that we hold the company accountable to ensure that it's going to be safe for everybody to be in there. And it's about us sticking together to make sure that the company does follow that through health and safety. On the other hand, if we find that the company's not doing it, then we do reach out to, for us in District 6, we've in the past have reached out to Sylvia Boyce, who's a health and safety coordinator for us, and she's been able to help address any of those issues.
Thanks very much, Anita. And I'm really pleased at the number of questions that have come in. I think we have time for at least one more of them at this point. So let's hear what Kimberly writes. And I'm thinking maybe Veronica, this might be one that you'd be interested in commenting on, or Meg. So Kimberly writes, I find we talk a lot about women with families and children and the immense struggles they are facing during the pandemic. I know for myself as a single woman, I find this time to be extremely isolating. I'm wondering if others are facing the same issue and how are sisters coping with isolation and their mental health during this time. So let's see if one of our speakers can come back on the line and provide maybe some insight or some of your own coping mechanisms. Veronica, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, no, that's a great question. I actually have some friends that have reached out to me quite a bit. They are isolated, alone, and being, quite frankly, afraid. They don't have work to go to. They have nobody to communicate with. Have somebody, if you can, reach out to. The other recommendation is reach out for some help through some counseling. It might take a couple days for them to get back to you. I know that here in our area, they're backlogged by about 3 days, but they're trained and they know how to give you some tools to start coping to help get through. It's a very serious issue. Your mental health is so important, and it's important to do whatever you need to do to look after that. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I know through the national office and some of the districts, we've been doing small learning events online about mental health. And some of the things that people have been saying that help them is to maintain a routine, even though their day is completely different now than it used to be, still, getting up at the same time, changing into, clean work clothes, trying to follow the same schedule is helpful. People have also talked about the value of physical exercise and of, now that maybe spring and summer are arriving, going outside, looking at the trees, getting some dirt under your fingernails, gardening if you have access to outside space is very helpful. We would also, we do encourage people to go to the Canadian Mental Health Association webpage, where they have a lot of really good resources related to mental health during the pandemic, recognizing that this is putting additional stresses on all of us. So thank you so much for those questions. It was a really lively discussion. And I'm sorry that we haven't been able to get to all of the questions right now, but let's see if we can return to more of them as we go along with our agenda. So I'm sure that you've heard lots of people say, we don't want to return to normal because normal wasn't working for all of us. And the United Steelworkers wants to work to build a better normal. And to tell us about what our union and other groups think should be included in that is Shannon Devine, head of USW's National IT and New Media Department. Shannon?
Thank you, Adrienne. We've heard from other speakers already tonight how the pandemic has shone a new light on many of the issues that have been on our shared agenda for decades. Right now, we're going to take a pause from the pandemic, and we're going to dare to dream about a different future. So let's start. Oh, next slide, please. Let's start with a drastic rethink of the care economy. So what that is the work of caring for the elderly, people with disabilities, children, and others. Within long-term care, we need a complete overhaul of the sector. Let's be honest. We've seen the devastation in long-term care homes, particularly in for-profit homes. And I want to emphasize that this is not the fault of the people working there who have worked very long hours and put themselves and their families at risk. USW members and other long-term care workers are among the real heroes of this pandemic. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. We need stronger regulation, and we need rules around minimum staffing levels, which don't even exist right now in many jurisdictions. The pandemic pay increases should be made permanent, and we need the creation of more full-time jobs. Many workers are employed at 2 or more homes just to make one full-time job, and this has to stop. If we believe our loved ones are valuable, which we most certainly do, we must value the work that goes into caring for them. The care economy must be the site of good jobs that are fairly paid with good benefits to ensure decent employment opportunities for people of all genders. and our social infrastructure needs to be expanded. This means a major investment on the part of the federal, provincial, and territorial governments to create more public, quality, affordable childcare, including after-school care. This crisis has shown just how important childcare is for working parents and how the economy can really not restart without it. As Meg mentioned already, during the pandemic, there has been a huge spike in reports of domestic violence. Women's organizations and groups working to end gender-based violence work on very, very small budgets with dedicated staff who are overworked and underpaid. Since the 1980s, conservative and liberal governments both have dramatically reduced money available to women's organizations, which worsened, of course, under the decade of the Stephen Harper government. Funding models have also changed, with grant agencies and governments favoring project funding as opposed to core funding, which allows work to continue. So we really need core funding. Next slide, please. We desperately need employment insurance reform. Part of the reason for the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit is, otherwise known as CERB, is just that very many people fall through the cracks of the EI system. The number of qualifying hours often puts it out of reach for many workers, especially those who are working part-time. And we know that women make up the majority of part-time workers, so that disproportionately affects women. EI compensation rates are also really low, around 55% of your former income. So we need to raise the rates to at least 65% or higher. Parental leave also needs to be more accessible. A couple of years ago, the federal government was looking at improving their parental leave program. And what they did, instead of adopting some of the bold ideas suggested by the labor movement, like a higher benefit or specific time to be used by the second parent, the federal government just extended the amount of time that parents can take. So it was extended from 1 year now to 18 months, but at the same rate. So the already low rate of 55% drops to 33% of your income, which makes it impossible for working class families to use this benefit for that period of time. And we want government action to close the gender wage gap. This means equal pay for work of equal value, the ability to form a union, and that means we need better labor laws right across the country, addressing harassment on the job, opportunities for women in the skilled trades and what are still considered non-traditional jobs, better leaves and pensions, and enforcement for pay equity. Some provinces have decent pay equity laws, but without enforcement, we really don't get any further ahead. And we know that in other areas like health and safety, without enforcement, we don't really get what we need. And we also want an increase to the minimum wage. So women make up the majority of minimum wage earners, particularly women from newcomer communities, women of color, young women, older women who are still in the workforce, and women with disabilities. The pandemic has exposed just how fragile the balance is for so many people. In Canada, Alberta is the only province with a $15 minimum wage. And a $15 minimum wage or higher would go a long way to help millions of people across the country, and many of them are women and women-led families. Okay, next slide, please. We want to see paid sick days introduced in every province and territory, as well as job-protected emergency leave, so that people can take the time they need in an emergency and they don't risk losing their jobs, which is very scary. So it's a barrier to really taking the time when you need it. And we suggest implementing a guaranteed annual income as well. And last but not least, we believe there must be a public awareness campaign to end the unequal division of household labor. An ongoing disparity in household labor in female-male households, which obviously is not all households, is one of the a big contributing factor to the ongoing gender wage gap. Research shows over and over again, as previous speakers have noted, that women tend to take more time for family and household matters, leading to reduced work hours, the need for more flexibility, and even part-time work at times. And so these are just some of the ideas that we believe should shape a post-pandemic economy that puts all women and equity at the center. Thank you very much, and back to you, Adrienne.
Thank you very much for that, Shannon. And now we want to get you involved in answering our final 2 poll questions, which relate to the things that Shannon just talked about. So our first of the final 2 poll questions is, which of these action items do you support? And you can click on all that you would agree with. So create a guaranteed annual income, reform employment insurance, close the gender wage gap, increase the minimum wage, or create more paid sick days and emergency leave days. So please take a few more seconds to go to your screens and click on the items that you support as things we need in the post-pandemic future. And I think, responses still coming in. We'll give a few more seconds for everybody to vote. And I think it's safe now to close that question and display the results. So we see extremely strong support, almost everybody, for adding more paid sick days and emergency leave days, but then also very, very strong support for increasing the minimum wage and closing the gender wage gap, and also strong support for guaranteed annual income and EI reform. So let's go to our final poll question. And this gives you a chance to weigh in on another series of action items that Shannon mentioned. So again, which of these action items do you support? You can vote for one or more of those. Let us know what you think. Well, that was fast. Okay, sorry. The system told me that everybody supported everything, but that appeared to have been a optimism on the part of the platform. So people are still voting. Let's give you a few more seconds to click on your answers. I think we can close that question now and display the results. So we see that we've got very strong support for increased regulation of long-term care homes and raising the pay of long-term care home workers, but also strong support for better funding for women's and anti-violence organizations and making sure that the economic recovery benefits women as well as men, followed by also strong support for creating more daycare spaces. And I think the idea of ending the unequal division of labor is one that we need to continue talking about because it is a unique one that we haven't talked a lot about publicly. So thanks for those poll results. I will mention that we did have other questions that came in. Unfortunately, we aren't going to have time to address them, but I did want to say that on the question of local union meetings, that the Canadian National Office through New Media and Education are working closely with the districts to try and provide availability of different sorts of online resources that would allow local unions to be able to hold different kinds of information and membership meetings online. And for any of your other questions, please don't be shy to reach out to your staff representative or your local president. If they don't immediately know the answer, then they're going to be very comfortable to reach out to other resources to be able to help you. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts. And we've come to the point in our gathering when we want to draw for our contest winner. So everyone who sent in one of these great photos had their name entered into the draw. The winner will receive this beautiful Women of Steel plate made by steelworkers at local 6346 at Wendell August Forge in Grove City, Pennsylvania. So we had 20 entries, and so I'm going to ask Veronica Tanner, who is chair of the National Women's Committee and who cannot see the names, to pick a number between 1 and 20.
12.
And so I'm happy to say that Alicia McLeod from Brandon, Manitoba is the winner of this beautiful prize. Congratulations, Alicia. Your prize will go in the mail as soon as possible. And thank you very much to all of you for sending in entries and photos. So no union event would be complete without singing Solidarity Forever, even just a bit of it. So I'm going to ask all of you, please, to unmute your mics and join with Meg, Veronica, Anita, and Shannon. So on the count of 3, let's sing the chorus together. Don't be shy. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Solidarity Well done. It was nice to hear all of our voices, even for a short time. So I'd like to encourage you to like and visit our National Women of Steel Facebook page. The address is Women of Steel Canada /Femme Dossier. That's where we post information and calls to action on issues like the ones we've talked about just now. That's the end of our virtual gathering. Thank you very much for joining us. Stay united, stay healthy, and let's keep working to make the world a more equal place for all women. Good night.